Engrossed House Bill 1195, now with Senate amendments, a bill for an act to amend and reenact Section 62 of the Code relating to carrying of a firearm concealed in a school.
Senator Oban.
Mr. President, engrossed House Bill 1195 comes to you from your Senate Education Committee with a 4-2 do not pass recommendation. As written, this bill would authorize any individual 21 years of age or older who possesses a concealed weapons license to carry on private or public school property upon receiving approval of the school. We heard in committee from a lot of people on both sides of this issue, from parents to principals, teachers to child psychologists, superintendents to even a handwritten letter submitted by the bill sponsor's granddaughter. They each gave their own personal opinions, laid out plenty of scenarios from potential massive attacks to accidental shootings to situations where cooler heads would quite possibly no longer prevail. But to be fair, those in opposition outnumbered those in support, and those in support, for the most part, came from an area north of Valley City whose school sits in a pretty isolated, desolate, according to them, in the middle of nowhere location. Now, Mr. President, I trust that each of my colleagues can read. I am hoping that is a fair judgment to make. But it's important that we talk about the content of this bill and not just the premise in generalities. If we were simply talking about whether or not guns can or should be allowed in North Dakota schools, that's actually not even debatable. We already allow guns in schools, so long as those guns are in the hands of trained law enforcement, a member of the armed forces, security personnel, or school resource officers. We aren't voting on the premise of whether we believe schools are appropriate places for guns, or if more guns mean greater safety or greater risk. We're voting on the language in front of us, and it was the opinion of the majority of your Senate Education Committee that language and the standards we would set, or maybe more specifically not set in this bill, don't do justice to what our schools, administrators, teachers, parents, and kids deserve from their legislature. So if I may, Mr. President, I would like to walk through a number of the questions that were left wholly unanswered by your Education Committee and issues that we took away with this bill. The bill does not limit the individual with a concealed carry to teachers and administrators or even to school staff at all. It's actually completely wide open to anyone, meaning it could be a 22-year-old who works at a grocery store, or someone's 83-year-old mother who, even while she has a concealed carry permit, has never actually shot a gun in her entire life. This bill provides confidentiality to the individual authorized to carry from school staff as well as from the public, which, ironically, after our last debate, includes parents of children in schools. Do parents have a right to know if a person with whom their child is spending 8 hours a day has a weapon locked up in the classroom or stored somewhere on their body during the course of a school day? With regard to granting immunity, which this bill also does for the school, what about in cases of intentional or willful misconduct? How protected is a school district simply by providing immunity from civil liability? I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you it probably won't take it very far. What is the impact of this type of policy and practice on the school's insurance? If self-insured, is the district or school able to handle potential lawsuits? Will a school that chooses this, who makes this choice, face insurance coverage challenges like the schools in Kansas that are already dealing with this? We actually heard from the North Dakota Insurance Reserve Fund that there could potentially be some difficulties covering a school who might decide to enact this policy. More specifically, we heard from law enforcement during the committee hearing, and a number of the questions posed by law enforcement I believe are worth repeating because, again, we didn't get answers for them. Law enforcement are trained to protect. Educators are trained to teach. Law enforcement are trained to carry the responsibility and weight of going to work every day knowing they may have to take the life of someone else. Educators are not. I certainly wasn't trained for that as a math teacher. Can or should anyone expect someone to take on the job of law enforcement plus do their own job as an educator at the same time? Deputies are required to qualify quarterly above state standards with handguns. Will this individual do the same? How often is the training required? What does the training entail? Are we as legislators confident in what those trainings would or should be, as written in this bill? Are those in a school or a school board or in a school district best trained to set those standards? Other questions posed by law enforcement. What type of firearms training should be required? One police chief shared with us that he has about a 90% accuracy rating in training, but when he was put in a situation exchanging gunfire, his accuracy diminished to 33%. What type of weapons retention training should be required? This same police chief shared with us a recent event where one of his largest and strongest officers had his weapon dislodged and discharged during an altercation. With regard to the presumption or assumption that law enforcement will provide the training mentioned in this bill, again, law enforcement pointed out to us that law enforcement don't typically train civilians on the wide and varying instances when a civilian can or cannot use deadly force. Many law enforcement agency heads have said that they will not train private civilians on the use of force, nor on proficiency with a firearm, because this would be a huge liability to them and to the city or county that trained them. Law enforcement also brought up with us that they are trained to move tactically toward gunfire with bulletproof vests on. Whether an individual possessing a concealed weapons license chooses to move toward gunfire, is there an added responsibility for that individual to now respond to this emergency situation? Are they allowed to evacuate their class first because it is safe to do so? Do they remain in lockdown without acting? And he left us with 3 very difficult questions that he posed to us. What if the carrier is a staff member and their child attends the school? Who do they go to first? What if the carrier comes upon their own child who is seriously or mortally wounded? And what if the carrier's child were to be the shooter? He also said I could speak to you for hours on the necessary training as well as scenario after scenario on how the black and white concept of good guy with a gun shoots the bad guy with a gun is complete fallacy. Mr. President, I just listed at least 30 questions that we were left with unanswered. I think our point has been made. This do not pass recommendation wasn't based on fears or worst-case scenarios any more or less than the reasons the bill was introduced in the first place. Are there better ways to deal with this? Yes. It is unfair and unwise to implore our schools with this kind of responsibility, especially when we haven't done everything we can do as a legislature at the state level to assist in prevention and preparation and appropriate intervention. This bill doesn't provide the better way. It provides the cheapest way, and perhaps the riskiest one. Your Senate Education Committee requests your red votes on engrossed House Bill 1195.
Senator Rust.
Mr. President, I was one of the Senate Education Committee members who voted against a do not pass recommendation. The reason that I support House Bill 1195 is that, first and foremost, it is permissive language for a school board to authorize someone to conceal carry in their school. I'm not sure that many school boards would exercise that option. That is up to individual schools. As I said, the bill is permissive. It does not mandate the arming of individuals. There are schools within my legislative district that are up to 60 miles away from the nearest law enforcement center. They have no school resource officer. There is no one to stop an active shooter in a school. If, and I emphasize if, The school board in one of those schools felt it was in their students' or staff's best interest to have someone designated and trained to conceal carry. That school board should be allowed to do that. Some may feel it's too dangerous to have someone in school with a weapon. The only thing that's worse than that is to have an active shooter in the building with free rein to do whatever he or she wants to do and no one to attempt to stop that individual. If this bill passes, school boards will be prohibited from exercising an option that may be their best and only alternative. I urge a green light on House Bill 1195.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Senator Lewick.
Mr. President, I too stand in favor of allowing the school districts to exercise that right to train somebody that is in their staff to protect those students. I also have districts that are in my area that are 20 minutes away from any type of help. It's a different scenario if you have a child that hits the floor and has a concussion, and that 911 call is made, and we can have that EMT or the fire department there in our local town that may show up within maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But if they're coming to an event like that, you know that they're going to rush right in those doors and help out that case. If it's a shooting case that gets reported, there's going to be an entirely different atmosphere, and the response time from somebody that has the ability to deal with something like that is not going to be the fire department. It's not going to be the emergency manager or the emergency staff from the fire department. They would have to wait for the highway patrol or the sheriff's department to come and attend to that. There is a huge amount of time that is lost in these events like this, very valuable time. And if somebody is on staff, maybe they can help out and stop some of it. Again, like was mentioned earlier, this is not mandated, and these people that are going to be asked to do this, if they wish, are going to be trained to the point where they have the same type of training that security people have. So I don't understand why we wouldn't give those school districts the leniencies to let that happen.
Senator Davison.
Mr. Chairman, the bill sponsor stood in front of us and started his testimony saying, you know what, here's your packet. Plan A was fund school resource officers in school. Plan B is what I'm testifying on here today with guns in school. There are 19 schools that have school resource officers. There are a couple small schools that have it. Guns in school is way too important issue, Mr. President, to be taken and voting green on Plan B.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, the question will be on final passage of House Bill 1195. Secretary, open the key. Every member record their vote. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Secretary, close the key and take the tally. Tally reveals 17 senators voting yea, 28 voting nay, 2 absent not voting. House Bill 1195 has failed.